Good evening, everyone. Tonight we gather in the gentle hush of this moment, where shadows lengthen and the wind sighs softly against your window pane. Maybe there's a subtle rhythm in the fan above, or the quiet pulse of crickets outside your door. In this pause between worlds, between wakefulness and sleep, your breath moves like a tide, slow and faithful. You may have had a long day, or a long week, or perhaps a long life. And yet, one thing has always been there, hasn't it? That quiet sense barely noticed, the soft hum behind your eyes, the voice you never quite hear, but always believe, I am. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And please, share your location and the time where you are joining us from tonight. I read every single one. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on a fan for a gentle hum, and let's begin our journey together tonight. Once upon a time, not in a faraway land, but in the soft stillness of the present moment, there lived an invisible guest. It had no face, no name, and no home. And yet it claimed to be everything. It whispered from behind the eyes, "This is me." It stirred with every thought, every sensation, every worry. It called itself I, and we believed it. How could we not? When pain pierced our chest, I was the one who suffered. When joy swelled our hearts, I was the one who smiled. I felt like a loyal companion, a silent witness to the unfolding film of life. But tonight, dear listener, we wonder together, is that I truly there? Or is it the most intimate illusion we've ever known? In the seen, there is only the seen. In the heard, there is only the heard. In the sensed, only the sensed. In the cognized, only the cognized. The Buddha Bahia Sutta, a Zen monk, once asked his master, "Where is the self?" The master simply pointed to the sky and said, "Bring me the wind that moves the cloud." The monk stood in silence. He understood. So let's breathe. Let's let that question unravel slowly in the quiet of this night. What is this I that we carry so tightly? The thinker of thoughts, the feeler of feelings, the doer of deeds. But pause. Do you choose every thought you think? Did you summon the memory that just passed like a ghost across your mind? Or did it arise, uninvited, like a ripple on the surface of still water? We assume there's a singular lasting self, a solid center behind all experience. But when we look closer, with eyes softened by silence, it's like chasing the echo of your own voice through a fog. Just sensation, just awareness, no one watching behind the curtain. The self is a story, told again and again, until we forget we are the storyteller. Quiet wisdom, even the most advanced neuroscientists, peering into the folds of the human brain, have yet to find a fixed self. There is no little person behind your eyes, no pilot in the cockpit, just a constellation of processes, ever shifting, ever empty. It's unsettling, and yet, it's also beautiful, because if the self is not a prison but a dream, then awakening is always near. There was a woman once, gray-haired and grieving, who came to a temple seeking answers. "My husband is gone," she said, "and I feel as if I've died with him." The old monk poured her tea, then pointed to the steam rising from the cup. "This steam," he said, "was once water. It rose and now dances in the air." The woman wept, not because she was sad, but because something in her remembered that she too was steam, not a fixed thing, but movement, memory, mystery. So tonight, as you lay in bed, feel the gentle rise and fall of your chest. Is that not the wind itself? Feel the thoughts drifting through your mind. Are they not clouds, shaped by no hand? And still, You may say, but I feel it. The eyes so real. Ah yes, that's the paradox. The self feels real because we've believed it forever. Like a dream you've had for so long, you've forgotten you were dreaming. It is not the self that suffers, it is the clinging to self that does. Buddhist teaching. So let's just begin with curiosity, not judgment, not disbelief, just this what if. The eyes, not the seer, but the seen. Not the center, but the swirl. Not the flame, but the flicker. You are not here to erase the self, dear one. You are here to see through it, gently, lovingly, like watching a mist dissolve in the morning sun. So rest your hands beside you. Let your body soften, and with every breath, let go of one more thread in the net that held you. The river flows whether or not you name it. Tonight, you do not need to be anyone. Just be. And now, before we drift deeper, a question to leave with you in the folds of sleep. What happens when the one who watches vanishes? The puppet and its strings. There is a story passed down among Zen practitioners, simple and strange in its simplicity. A boy once carved a puppet out of driftwood. He shaped it carefully with his small, patient hands, tying strings to its arms, legs, and head. When he pulled the threads, the puppet danced, awkward at first, then fluid, as if it possessed a soul. He gave the puppet a name. He spoke to it, asked it questions, and answered for it in a voice that sounded nothing like his own. As time passed, he forgot that he was the one pulling the strings. The puppet became real to him. He obeyed its needs, defended its opinions, even apologized for its faults. This tale, while meant to amuse, offers a metaphor with haunting resonance. So much of what we call I behaves like that puppet. We identify with a certain voice in our head, assign it the role of author, and bow to its decisions as though they were autonomous. But what if the mind's inner narrator is not the one writing the script? When we examine our lives, even gently, we begin to see how much of what we think, feel, and do arises not from some sovereign central self, but from causes beyond our grasp. Why did you choose your favorite color? Why does your voice tremble when a certain song plays? Why do certain people make your heart ache or your chest tighten before a word has even been spoken? These reactions emerge like the reflex of the puppet's arms, conditioned, automatic, traced back to early memories, cultural cues, passing moods, and even the body's subtle chemistry. The Buddha taught this truth with startling clarity. He reminded his disciples that the illusion of a separate, independent agent, the one who decides, who acts, who thinks, emerges only after the act itself. The thought arrives, and then we claim it. The emotion arises, and then we say, I feel this. But we did not summon it. We did not compose it like a musician sitting at the piano. It simply appeared, the result of conditions we rarely notice. In the Anattā Sutta, the Buddha asked his followers to look at their minds, not with doctrine, but with direct observation. If thoughts arise without our bidding and fade without our permission, then where is the self in that process? We say, I think, but we rarely think deliberately. More often, we are being thought. Modern psychology, and even neuroscience, echoes this view. The mind is a web of subsystems. Some recall memories, others detect danger. Still others imagine possibilities or generate inner speech. What we call me is not the originator of these processes, but the story that connects them. The brain, when at rest, activates the default mode network, a mechanism designed to narrate, to center every experience around a fictional protagonist. And yet, when we turn inward in silence, Through meditation, reflection, or deep rest, this narration softens. With eyes closed and distractions stilled, the voice grows quiet. What remains is not an identity but awareness itself, open, receptive, unnamed. This shift can be unsettling. Like the boy who realizes he has been obeying his puppet, we may feel a wave of disorientation. If I am not the originator of my actions, who am I? If the strings of desire, memory, and habit move me, am I just an actor without a script? But the truth is not meant to strip you of meaning. It is meant to set you free from blame and pride alike. There was a nun once, elderly and half-blind, who spent her final years sweeping leaves in the courtyard of a quiet monastery. A novice once asked her why she continued such a humble chore despite her frailty. She smiled and said, "The wind blows them here. The wind carries them away. I just touch them for a while." She did not claim authorship over her task. She did not need to. Her hands moved, her heart was calm, and the work was done. There was no self in the sweeping, only presence. Likewise, when we stop clinging to the illusion of being the puppet master, life becomes lighter. We stop needing to justify every reaction, every choice. We begin to understand that much of what arises is not personal. It is not ours. It is simply the unfolding of causes and conditions, like wind through the trees or a wave across the ocean. This realization, when approached not with fear but with kindness, can be deeply healing. You no longer need to punish yourself for every perceived failure. You no longer need to believe that you are the broken thing behind the pain. Often it was the strings moving you all along. The Buddha said, "All things are preceded by mind, led by mind, made by mind." But he did not mean your mind alone. He meant that the mind, in its vastness, its interconnectedness, is like a mirror reflecting countless impressions. If you see anger, it reflects anger. If you offer compassion, it reflects peace. And within that mirror, there is no fixed figure watching, just movement, just moment-to-moment awareness. Let this bring you comfort, not confusion. The self may be an illusion, but that does not mean there is nothing. It means what you are is far more spacious than you believed. Not a puppet, not a puppeteer, but the awareness that holds the stage. So tonight, as you begin to drift deeper, allow the grip of ownership to loosen. Let the mind do what it does. Let thoughts wander in and out like gentle visitors. You are not obligated to follow. You are not required to explain. You are not the voice narrating the story. You are the silence that listens. And in that silence, there is a peace that cannot be manufactured. A peace that does not need a self to exist. And now, as you rest quietly, consider this gentle question. If the strings fall away, will the dance still continue? The self that was never found. There once lived a young seeker who spent his days walking the mountain paths, searching for something he could not quite name. He had read scriptures and spoken with sages, listened to the wind in pine trees and the silence between his own heartbeats. But no matter where he went, no matter how far he climbed, one question kept returning like an echo he couldn't silence. Who am I? One morning he came to a modest Zen temple, nestled on the slope of a quiet hill. The monk who lived there was old, with hands calloused from years of sweeping and eyes that seemed to hold the stillness of the moon. The seeker approached, bowed deeply, and asked the question that had followed him since childhood. "I've searched for myself across every horizon," he said, "but I have never truly seen it. Where is this I keep trying to find?" The old monk smiled gently, took a cup of tea from a wooden shelf, and placed it in the young man's hands. "Drink slowly," he said, "and tell me which part of the tea is you." The seeker was confused, but he drank anyway. The warmth traveled down his throat. The fragrance stirred something ancient within. But no matter how he searched within that moment, within the steam, the sensation, the gratitude, he could not find himself inside the tea. The monk poured a second cup, then quietly left the room. That was the answer. So often in life we assume there must be a core, a singular, unchanging self sitting at the center of all experience. It feels obvious. It feels inevitable. There is a me who sees through these eyes, who remembers these moments, who suffers these wounds and claims these joys. But when we examine the experience carefully, without assuming anything, we find that we've never actually seen this self directly. We have seen thoughts, feelings, reactions, and memories, but no separate observer standing apart from them. This is precisely the insight the Buddha pointed to when he spoke of Anattā, or not self. It was not a philosophical trick or a clever wordplay. It was an invitation to look without pretense or expectation. What we find is that the self is never present in the way we imagine it to be. It doesn't reside in the body, because the body is always changing, cells dying, growing, aging, aching. It doesn't reside in emotion, because feelings pass like weather, nor does it hide in memory, because memory is fragile and selective, rearranging itself with each retelling. And if it is not in any of these, where is it? We say, I feel sad, but what is this I that feels? Is it something fixed behind the sadness, or simply the sadness itself, briefly appearing and then passing on? We say, I made a choice, but most of our decisions are guided by unseen patterns, by habit, conditioning, fear, longing, fatigue. Long before the choice reaches the surface of awareness, the deeper mind has already tilted toward one outcome or another. In the Meditative Sutta, the Buddha described how experience arises, dependent on contact between the senses and the world. Feeling is born. From feeling, perception arises. From perception, thought. From thought, proliferation. And from this proliferation, the endless spinning of mental fabrications, the idea of a self emerges. But it is only ever that an idea, a narrative stitched together from flickers of sensation and memory, a mirage we mistake for a mirror. The seeker in our story stayed at the monastery for several days. He swept the garden, ate simply, and sat in stillness each morning. No great revelation came to him, no voice from the sky. But one day, as he watched a butterfly land on a leaf, he realized something quietly profound. The butterfly had no awareness of him. The wind did not pause for his breath, and the leaf did not tremble in fear of his gaze. Yet all of it was deeply real. The world moved beautifully, without needing to revolve around an eye. He began to understand that perhaps the self he was chasing had never been there to begin with. Perhaps it was not lost, but imagined, not hidden, but invented. A name we give to a stream so we can pretend to hold it. And yet even in this seeing, there was no despair, only relief. Because when we release the burden of having to be someone, constantly, consistently, without flaw, we make space for something far more gentle: presence, openness, life itself. This insight does not require us to erase personality or abandon individuality. We will still smile our smiles, speak in our own voices, remember old songs, and laugh in our familiar ways. The difference is that we no longer grip these traits as identities. We no longer need to defend a false center. We no longer confuse the mask for the face. A monk once said, "Before enlightenment, I was depressed. After enlightenment, I was still sometimes depressed, but I no longer called it mine." This subtle shift is everything. When sadness visits, it is no longer my sadness. It is just a cloud passing through the open sky of awareness. When joy rises, it is not a possession to cling to, it is a breeze through an open window. And through this openness, life becomes spacious again, less burdened by performance, less haunted by shame. The self, then, is not a prison we must escape, but a story we no longer need to believe. So let yourself rest here, in this not knowing, in this tender space beyond identification. You do not need to find yourself tonight. There is no task to complete. The tea is still warm, the butterfly still flies, and you, just as you are, do not need to be anyone. You are here, and that is enough. Before we drift further, here is something to wonder in the quiet of sleep. If the self was never truly there, what has always been with you, watching gently, without a name?
5 candles in the wind. In a quiet hall of an ancient temple, 5 candles were placed in a line on an altar, each flickering with a steady, delicate flame. A novice monk once asked his teacher, "Which of these is the real flame?" The teacher did not answer directly. Instead, he gently blew out one of the candles, then another, then another. Each time the light vanished, but the room remained softly aglow from the ones that still burned. "They are all real," the teacher said at last, "but none of them lasts." This image, though simple, reflects one of the most profound teachings the Buddha ever offered, the teaching of the 5 aggregates, or pancakhanda. According to Buddhist insight, what we call a person is not a singular entity, but a temporary gathering of 5 dynamic processes: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. These are not things we have. They are what we are, moment to moment, always shifting. And crucially, none of them, alone or combined, can rightly be called a permanent self. The first candle is form, rupa, the body and the physical world. This includes not only the bones, skin, and organs we associate with ourselves, but also the objects of the senses, the sights, sounds, smells, and textures of the world we touch. Yet form is never fixed. The body is in constant flux. Cells die and renew, muscles grow and weaken, the breath rises and falls. The Buddha said, "Form is not self, because it cannot be controlled, and it never remains the same." To say, "I am this body," is like claiming ownership of a river. You may step into it, you may feel it rush past your skin, but you cannot hold it. And if the body is impermanent, then it cannot be the foundation of an enduring self. The second candle is feeling vedana, the immediate sensations of pleasure, pain, or neutrality that arise with every experience. These are the whispers of the world on your skin, in your chest, behind your eyes. Joy surges unexpectedly, sadness lingers in the quiet hours, boredom creeps in, unnoticed, until it fills the room. The Buddha taught that feelings are also not self, for they arise due to contact, last briefly, and pass away. If we were truly our feelings, then we would be reborn 1,000 times each day, once with every passing emotion. But we are not these waves. We are the ocean they pass through. The third candle is perception sanya, the mind's capacity to recognize and interpret. It sees color and calls it red. It hears tone and names it anger. It meets a stranger and says friend or threat, without a word exchanged. Perception is how the world becomes labeled, and through labeling shaped. But perception is also deeply fallible. It changes over time, influenced by mood, memory, and context. What we feared yesterday may feel harmless now. What once gave comfort may now stir discomfort. If perception shifts so easily, how can it be the core of who we are? The fourth candle is mental formations, sikkhara, the complex web of thoughts, impulses, intentions, and habits
that influence our choices and reactions. These include the unseen architecture of personality, the way we lean toward generosity, or anger, or restlessness, without quite knowing why. Often we believe we are choosing freely, but most of our decisions are shaped by patterns laid down long before we were aware of them. Mental formations arise out of causes, culture, upbringing, trauma, love. They are conditioned responses, and so the Buddha taught, these too are not self. They belong not to a central agent, but to a long chain of influence, stretching beyond what the eye can see. The fifth candle is consciousness vinyasa, the bare awareness of experience. It is what knows the light, hears the sound, senses the touch. But even consciousness is not a constant flame. It arises dependent on a sense base and an object. Eye and form produce visual consciousness. Ear and sound produce auditory consciousness. There is no single unified awareness, observing all from behind a curtain. There is only a succession of moments, each appearing and disappearing, like reflections in a stream. When the Buddha said, consciousness is not self, he was inviting us to see that even our most intimate sense of being aware is not a permanent possession. It too is a visitor. Taken together, the five aggregates reveal something revolutionary. We are not a fixed being moving through time. We are a changing event, a process, a dance of conditions. Like the five candles, each part contributes light, but none alone can claim authorship of the glow. And when one extinguishes, the others continue. There is no master behind the flames, only the wind that moves through them. This may sound abstract, but it touches something deeply personal. How often do we suffer because we believe the pain is ours, that the sadness defines us, that the fear is evidence of weakness? We say, I am broken, I am angry, I am ashamed, when in truth, these are experiences passing through the aggregates, not truths about a core identity. In letting go of the illusion of self, we are not disappearing, we are becoming free. Free from the pressure to constantly fix, prove, or protect a phantom. Free to respond rather than react. Free to meet the present moment, not as a performance, but as a presence. A teacher once said, we suffer not because the wind blows, but because we try to hold the wind. In understanding the five aggregates, we begin to let the wind pass through us. We stop clinging to the flame. We become the space in which it flickers. Tonight, as you lie quietly, notice how your body shifts against the sheets, how sensations rise and fade, how thoughts drift and reform. These are the candles of experience. Watch them without grasping. Let them burn. Let them rest. You are not the flame, nor the wick, nor even the hand that lights them. You are the room in which they shine. As the night deepens, reflect on this question as you settle into stillness. If the self is not one flame, but five flickering lights, what remains when they all go out? The body is not the boat. There was once a fisherman who spent his entire life on a narrow wooden boat. From early childhood, the boat carried him across rivers and lakes, through calm mornings and storm-lashed nights. He patched its cracks, polished its planks, and learned every creak of its structure. Over the years, it became more than a vessel. It became a home, a companion, even a part of his identity. This boat, he would say, is me. But one evening, as the sky turned copper and the waves fell silent, the boat struck a submerged rock and began to take on water. The fisherman panicked, not just because of the danger, but because he felt as if he himself was sinking. The line between his body and the boat had blurred long ago. As the vessel groaned and began to break apart, he clung to it in desperation, refusing to swim to shore, refusing to let go. It was not until another traveler passed by and offered him a hand that he remembered. he was never the boat. This is how many of us live. We confuse the body, this changing, aging, pulsing form, with the core of who we are. We measure our worth by its appearance, its strength, its youth, or its health. When it's praised, we feel worthy. When it suffers or falters, we feel diminished. And when it begins to fail with time, we grieve not just its function, but its identity, as if we are vanishing with every wrinkle, every ache, every forgotten word. But the Buddha reminded us that form is not self. The body is not the boat, nor the captain, nor the sea. It is a temporary vehicle, built from food and breath, shaped by time and chance. Its cells turn over constantly. Its appearance alters with light, mood, and perspective. In the Anattā Sutta, the Buddha tells his disciples that form is not something we own, not something we can command. If it were truly ours, we could make it youthful forever. We could stop pain, illness, or death. But none of that is within our control. So how can it be me? Still, the illusion is strong. We are taught from childhood to say, my hand, my face, my heart, until the boundary between possession and identity fades. We dress the body, sculpt it, pierce it, color it, feed it with pleasure, or punish it with deprivation. We are taught to love it, hate it, fear its changes. Yet no matter what we do, the body changes anyway. Just like the boat, drifting on a tide it cannot steer. This teaching is not meant to alienate us from the body. On the contrary, it's meant to free us from the anxiety of trying to anchor identity in something so clearly impermanent. The body is precious, it is sacred, but it is not who we are in any ultimate sense. A Zen story tells of an old woman who lived near a monastery. She had cooked for the monks for many years, always bowing as she delivered the bowls of food. One day, a younger monk asked her, "Why do you bow every time, even when no one sees?" She smiled and said, "Because this body is my guest, not my master. I bow to the life passing through it." That simple phrase, "my body is a guest," holds a powerful truth. This form, with its fatigue and strength, its beauty and decay, is not something to be condemned or worshipped. It is to be honored, tended, and eventually released. Like a traveler's robe or a rain-soaked coat, it serves its purpose for a time, and then it returns to the earth. In Buddhist reflection, meditating on the body often begins with direct observation. This is skin, this is bone, this is breath. Not to devalue the body, but to see it clearly. The Buddha spoke of contemplation on the body as a way to free ourselves from clinging. When we understand that this physical form is made of elements, earth, water, fire, wind, we begin to loosen the grip of vanity, shame, and fear. And yet, this realization is not dry or clinical. In fact, it often leads to deep tenderness. When we see the body not as me, but as a miraculous process, beating, breathing, healing, aging, we begin to treat it with more gentleness. We let go of the harsh judgments. We stop demanding perfection. We stop fearing the inevitable changes. A woman once visited a meditation teacher after being diagnosed with a chronic illness. She was devastated. "My body is failing me," she said. The teacher listened, then offered her a bowl of water. "Hold this," he said, "and notice what happens." As she held it, her hand began to shake. The water rippled and spilled. She looked ashamed. "I'm sorry," she said. But the teacher only smiled. "That is what the body does," he said. "It trembles, it changes, but the awareness that sees the shaking, that has never changed, this is the heart of the teaching. We are not the shaking hand. We are not the symptoms or the scars. We are not the boat. We are the awareness that sees it drift. Tonight, as you lie in stillness, feel the body resting beneath you, the weight of your bones,
the softness of your breath, the warmth in your chest. These are not possessions to cling to, nor enemies to resent. They are sensations changing, flowing, appearing, and fading. With each breath, let go of the idea that this is who you are. You are not the tension in your shoulders. You are not the aging in your skin. You are the space in which these sensations rise and fall. You are the silence that watches kindly, without resistance. And when the boat begins to sink, whether slowly through the years or suddenly through illness, may you remember that you were never bound to it. May you remember that the shore has always been near. As your body relaxes deeper into sleep, consider this quiet question. If your body is not who you are, who is it that feels the weight of peace returning now?
Feelings are clouds, not sky. There was once a village nestled high in the mountains where the sky often vanished beneath thick clouds. The villagers would gaze upward, waiting for the blue to return, forgetting what the sky looked like on days it was hidden. An old traveler passing through overheard their complaints and said, "The sky never left. You just stopped trusting what was behind the mist." In much the same way, our feelings often fill the entire field of awareness, obscuring everything else. A wave of sadness, a sudden joy, a lingering regret. They rise like weather systems and convince us that they are the whole of who we are. And just as the villagers mistook the passing fog for the sky itself, we mistake transient emotions for something solid, defining, even permanent. But feelings, as the Buddha taught, are not self. They are visitors, guests, momentary responses born of contact between the senses, the body, and the mind. We do not summon them, though we often believe we do, and we cannot make them stay or leave on command, though we often try. They arise, dwell briefly, and vanish, each with its own flavor, its own texture, and its own timing. The second of the five aggregates, Vedana, reminds us that what we experience as feeling is not a fixed state, but a constant flux. These sensations are categorized simply pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. A soft pillow beneath the head is pleasant. A sharp word from someone we love, unpleasant. The passing hum of the refrigerator, neither. Yet from this simple triad arises a whole world of reaction, craving, and identity. When we feel pleasure, we grasp. We want it to last. When we feel pain, we resist. We want it gone. And when we feel nothing at all, we often search for stimulation to fill the void. This cycle, grasping, resisting, seeking, keeps us bound to suffering, not because of the feelings themselves, but because of how we relate to them. There's a story from the Theravada tradition of a monk who meditated in a cave for many months. Each day he felt different. Some mornings he awoke light and peaceful, as if the mountain itself were breathing through him. Other days he felt a heaviness, a sorrow he couldn't name, or an irritation that seemed to come from nowhere. For a time he judged himself harshly, believing the bad feelings meant he was failing. But an elder monk later told him, "The weather changes, but the cave remains. Let the feelings pass through like wind. Do not mistake them for signs." This advice transformed the young monk's practice. He stopped chasing the blissful states and stopped fearing the difficult ones. He began to sit with whatever arose, not indulging, not resisting, simply observing. In doing so, he discovered something profound. The more space he gave to his feelings, the more gently they moved, like birds that flutter less when not trapped. This is the art of mindful observation, not suppression, not indulgence, but clear seeing. When we experience sadness and believe, "I am sad," we fuse our identity with the emotion. But when we observe, "Sadness is here," something shifts. The sadness becomes a guest, not a captor. It is no longer your entire being. It is a wave passing through your awareness. And waves do pass. Even the most intense emotions cannot sustain themselves indefinitely. Joy fades. Anger softens. Grief, though it may return in echoes, also transforms. The heart is resilient, not because it avoids pain, but because it can feel deeply without becoming frozen in what it feels. In Buddhist practice, it is said that the wise do not fear pain, nor cling to pleasure. They understand that both are part of the flow of existence. To cling to joy is to fear its loss. To resist sorrow is to multiply it. But to open to both, to feel fully without attachment, is to begin to taste true freedom. Modern psychology, too, echoes this view. Research shows that labeling emotions in a non-judgmental way, affect labeling, as it's called, can reduce their intensity. Simply saying, "This is sadness," rather than suppressing or analyzing it, activates parts of the brain associated with regulation and calm. What ancient monks observed in meditation, neuroscience now confirms with brain scans. Awareness changes the experience. There is a deep kindness in this truth. You do not have to fix your feelings tonight. You do not have to chase away sorrow or summon joy. All you must do is see them clearly, let them be what they are, and know that they do not define you. Just as the sky does not become the storm that moves through it, you are not your passing moods. You are not your irritations, your longings, or even your loneliness. You are the open sky of awareness in which all these pass, momentary, shifting, and ultimately transparent. Tonight, as your body rests and your breath slows, notice any lingering sensations. Perhaps there's restlessness in your chest or softness in your belly. Perhaps a memory stirs, evoking warmth or ache. Let these be what they are. Invite them in, gently, without resistance. Say to yourself, "This too is passing. This too is allowed." And if a difficult emotion lingers, do not wrestle with it. Sit with it the way you would with a tired friend. Offer your presence. Offer your breath. Trust that it too is moving, even if it feels still. As the old Zen saying goes, let the muddy water settle, and the right action will reveal itself. When we stop stirring the pot, the water clears. When we stop identifying with the emotion, we begin to see the space around it. The clouds will come and go, but the sky has never left. As sleep gently approaches, carry this reflection into your dreaming. If your feelings are clouds, then who is the sky they pass through?
The mirror of perception. A long time ago, in a quiet monastery at the edge of a forest, a monk was assigned to sweep fallen leaves each morning before the sun rose. One day, a visitor arrived and watched the monk perform his task with great care, only to return the next morning and find him doing the same thing again and again, though the leaves would inevitably fall again the next day. Curious, the visitor asked, "Why sweep so carefully when the leaves will only return?" The monk smiled and replied, "I do not sweep for the leaves. I sweep for the clarity it brings to the mind that sees them." Perception, in the Buddhist tradition, is more than the act of seeing or hearing. It is the mind's tendency to recognize, label, and assign meaning to what arises in experience. Known as sanya, perception is the third of the five aggregates and one of the most powerful. It shapes not only how we experience the world, but also how we define ourselves within it. We do not merely see a tree, we see a beautiful tree or a lonely one depending on our inner landscape. We do not simply hear a voice,
We hear kindness or criticism, filtered through the lenses we've inherited, developed or protected. And because perception so often operates beneath our awareness, it quietly determines how we move through life. Two people can witness the same sunset. One weeps, the other checks their phone. What is different is not the light in the sky, but the mirror of perception each holds before it. The Buddha taught that perception is not self because it too is conditioned. Like the others, it is not a fixed trait, but a process. It arises based on past impressions, memories, expectations, and beliefs. We see what we expect to see. We hear what we've been trained to hear. And because perception is so fluid, so easily influenced, it cannot serve as the solid ground we often try to build our identity upon. In daily life, this becomes evident when we notice how quickly our views change. A person we once distrusted becomes dear to us. A place that seemed ordinary becomes sacred after loss. Even our own reflections shift in meaning. How we see ourselves in the mirror can vary drastically from one day to the next. But the face has not changed. Only the perception of it has. There is a Zen saying, "To see things as they are, not as we are." This points to the essential challenge and invitation of perception. Most of the time, we project ourselves onto the world and mistake our reaction for reality. But the practice is to notice the projection, not to eliminate it forcefully, but to soften its grip. In a well-known parable, the Buddha once instructed his disciples to look closely at a mirage. "It appears," he said, "as if it is real, water glimmering in the distance. But when approached, there is nothing there." He compared this to the way perception can fool us. It takes the raw data of experience and through habit and mental formation turns it into a story. This is good, this is bad, this is who I am. But the story is not the experience. It is a layer we place upon it. Consider how many misunderstandings arise not from what was said or done, but from how it was perceived. A tone mistaken for indifference, a glance mistaken for judgment, an absence mistaken for rejection. In relationships, perception can become a barrier or a bridge, depending on how well we understand its nature. The teachings encourage us to investigate, is what I'm perceiving true, or is it colored by old patterns? This inquiry does not come from suspicion, but from compassion. Because when we realize perception is conditioned, we begin to extend more patience, not only to others, but also to ourselves. We understand that the mind, like water, reflects the shape of whatever container it's placed in. And just as muddy water clears when left undisturbed, perception clarifies when not constantly agitated by judgment or fear. There was once a teacher who invited her students to sit before a mirror for 1 full hour. At first, many felt discomfort, laughter, or boredom. But as time passed, something changed. The faces they saw became less about appearance and more about presence. Some cried, some smiled. One student later said, "At first I saw my flaws. Then I saw my mother's sadness in my eyes. Then I saw nothing at all. And that was when I felt peace." This story reminds us that perception evolves. It is layered. It holds memory, emotion, and history. But beneath those layers is awareness itself, untouched, unconditioned, observing it all without becoming caught. When we understand that perception is not self, we loosen the grip of identity. We begin to question the stories we've told ourselves for decades about who we are, what we're worth, and how others see us. Not to discard those stories completely, but to hold them more lightly, with curiosity rather than certainty. Tonight, as you lie in stillness, notice what you're perceiving in this moment. The weight of the blanket,
the sound of your breath, perhaps a lingering emotion or an image from earlier today. Then ask gently, is this truly what is here, or is it what I am seeing through? Notice if the emotion changes. Notice if the story softens. Let perception flow like water, without the need to catch or shape it. You are not what you perceive. You are not even the one who perceives. You are the awareness in which perception arises and fades, like reflections on a mirror that itself remains untouched. When the mirror is clean, it reflects truth. When it is cloudy, it reflects confusion. But it is always a mirror, always present, always clear beneath the dust. And now, as the mind quiets further, let this question drift with you into rest. If perception can change what is seen, what sees the changing?
Who thinks these thoughts? There is a tale from a remote Buddhist monastery about a young monk who spent much of his time writing. He filled page after page with thoughts, questions, dreams, and fears. He wrote when he was happy, and he wrote even more when he was sad. One day, the head monk picked up one of the pages, read a few lines, and asked, "Who is speaking here?" The young monk hesitated. "These are my thoughts," he replied. The elder nodded. "Then bring me the one who thinks them." For weeks, the young monk searched. He watched his mind during meditation, observed his emotions during chores, and paid attention to the inner chatter as he walked the mountain trails. Thoughts came and went, some sharp, some soft, some nonsensical. But no matter how hard he looked, he could never find the thinker. He found only thoughts, floating and fading, like leaves in the wind. This question, who thinks these thoughts, seemed so obvious at first. Of course it's me, we might say. Who else could it be? But when we look closely, the ground beneath that assumption begins to shift. For most of us, thoughts arise without effort. They appear in the mind like guests arriving at a house we forgot we owned. We don't invite them, and often we wish they would leave. Still they come, unprompted, unpredictable, sometimes comforting, sometimes distressing, and yet we claim ownership of them. "I am thinking this," we say, or "I can't stop my thoughts." But what if thinking is not something we do, in the way we think it is, but something that happens within us, conditioned, automatic, arising from causes beyond our conscious control? The Buddha explored this deeply in his teachings on sakkha, or mental formations, the fourth of the five aggregates. These formations include thoughts, intentions, impulses, habits, and the emotional imprints that shape our behavior. They are not simply thoughts in the narrow sense, but the entire undercurrent of mental activity, some conscious, most not. And crucially, they too are not self. Mental formations arise from prior causes, a conversation from childhood, an unprocessed trauma, a habit learned from a parent, a belief absorbed unconsciously from culture. Even the way we form preferences, why we like one flavor over another, why certain colors feel soothing, often traces back to moments we cannot remember. These patterns operate silently in the background, guiding decisions before we are even aware that we've made them. This doesn't mean we have no agency. Rather, it reveals that our sense of control is often narrower than we assume. When we believe I am the thinker, we assign identity to a stream that began long before this moment. But the Buddha taught that freedom doesn't come from controlling thoughts. It comes from not identifying with them. A well-known Buddhist analogy compares the mind to a stage and thoughts to actors appearing on it. Some come with drama, demanding attention. Others wander in quietly and leave without applause. The problem arises when we mistake the actors for ourselves, when we believe the villain's voice is our own, or that the tragic monologue is our destiny. But awareness is the stage,
not the performer. The stage allows all roles to appear, but clings to none. In meditation, we often observe the wild variety of thoughts that arise, the mundane, the profound, the absurd. A memory from 20 years ago, a craving for something sweet, a worry about something that hasn't happened, a judgment, a plan, a phrase from a commercial. None of these were called forth deliberately. They simply appear, and if we watch long enough, they also dissolve, without force, without effort, like clouds parting under a rising sun. A woman once came to a meditation teacher and confessed, "My thoughts are too noisy. I try to quiet them, but they just get louder." The teacher asked, "Do you believe the noise belongs to you?" She paused, unsure. "Perhaps," she said. The teacher nodded. "That belief is what feeds them. Try just listening. Let them be like birds in a distant tree. They are not in your hands. They do not need your name." This shift from "I am thinking" to "thoughts are arising" opens a space inside us that had long been closed. A space where we are no longer entangled in every story, no longer burdened by every judgment, no longer defined by every passing mood. We become the observer, not the prisoner. Modern neuroscience supports this perspective in surprising ways. Researchers have found that decisions can often be predicted milliseconds before we consciously become aware of making them. Brain scans show activity in decision-making regions before we decide. This raises a profound question. If the thought arises before we think it, who exactly is doing the thinking? This does not mean we are powerless, but it invites humility. It reminds us that thought is a process, complex, conditioned, and often automatic. And if we are not the sole authors of our thoughts, we are certainly not obligated to take each one seriously. We are free to listen without reacting, to witness without absorbing, to question without clinging. Tonight, as you lie quietly in the stillness of your room, notice the thoughts drifting through your mind. Perhaps they are about your day, your to-do list, your regrets, or your hopes. Watch them as you would watch clouds through a high window, coming and going, changing shape, dissolving at the edges. You are not those thoughts. You are not the one who must fix them or finish them. You are the space in which they arise and disappear. The mind will continue to produce thoughts, as it always has, but you don't need to chase them, argue with them, or claim them. Like the monk and his pages, you can set down the pen and rest in the quiet that remains when there's nothing left to say. And as you surrender more deeply into rest, ask gently, if thoughts think themselves, what is it that simply watches them pass?
The sound of no mind. In a forest monastery surrounded by the hush of tall bamboo, there lived an elderly monk who had not spoken for many years. Some said he had taken a vow of silence. Others believed he had simply found no more use for words. Still, younger monks watched him closely, curious about what lay behind his quiet gaze. One day, a student finally asked, "Master, what do you hear in your silence?" The old monk paused, then softly replied, "The sound of no mind." To understand what he meant is not a matter of concept, but of experience. In daily life, most of us live immersed in sound, external and internal. Voices, traffic, music, footsteps, and just beneath that, a subtler noise, the chatter of thought, the judgments, the commentary, the inner dialogue that speaks even when no one else does. We rarely experience raw silence, and we almost never experience mind without narration. But beneath this ever-playing script, there is a kind of awareness that does not speak. It knows, but it does not name. It hears, but it does not label. In the Buddhist tradition, this is sometimes called Vijnana, consciousness, the fifth of the five aggregates. It is the basic knowing of experience, the clear, bright presence that makes seeing, hearing, and sensing possible. But unlike the self we often imagine, something solid and continuous, consciousness in this teaching is event-based. It arises and passes moment to moment, always dependent on contact. The Buddha taught that consciousness is not like a spotlight beaming steadily from within. It is more like a match that lights and extinguishes with each contact. Sight arises when eye meets form and light. Hearing arises when ear meets sound, and so on. There is no single awareness watching all from behind a curtain. There is only the continual arising of experience, each flickering into being, then fading, and just like the other aggregates, consciousness is not self. This can be a disorienting truth at first. If even consciousness is not stable, where do we root our identity? Where is the unchanging witness we so often feel must be there? But in meditation, something else becomes clear. When the mind grows still, not through suppression, but through soft, sustained attention, a different kind of silence emerges. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of friction. There is still awareness, but it no longer clings. It no longer rushes to analyze or judge. It simply receives like a mirror that reflects, but does not hold. The great Zen master Dogen wrote, "To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be awakened by all things." In the space of no mind, the boundary between observer and observed begins to dissolve. The sound of the bird is not out there. The awareness of it is not in here. There is just the sound, just hearing, just being. One woman who had practiced mindfulness for many years once described a moment during retreat where her sense of self seemed to dissolve. She said, "It wasn't frightening. It was like everything was still happening, hearing, breathing, sensing, but I didn't need to be there for it to happen. It was peaceful, just presence, without a center." This is not an experience to grasp or recreate. In fact, trying to possess it is what makes it vanish. But knowing that such a space exists, an awareness beyond identification, can change the way we move through daily life. We begin to trust in something deeper than thought. We stop needing to assign meaning to every sensation. We begin to rest in a kind of natural clarity that asks for nothing but openness. There's an old teaching in Zen that says, "The sound of the bell is not in the bell, it is not in the ear, it is in the meeting." This points to the conditional nature of consciousness. Awareness is not a possession, not a fixed identity. It is a moment of arising, a bell meeting an ear, a breeze meeting skin, a thought meeting attention. And when no meeting occurs, what remains? Not emptiness in the sense of nothingness, but emptiness in the sense of spaciousness. A quiet that is not absence, but presence without grasping. This is the sound of no mind, the sound of awareness resting in itself, not chasing, not resisting, simply being. As modern neuroscience continues to map the brain, even it cannot find a central command center, no fixed self controlling the mind like a pilot. Rather, it finds distributed networks, patterns of activation, systems working in coordination. The you believe in, it turns out, is more of a process than a person, an orchestration, not a soloist. And when those systems pause, there is still presence, still breath, still life. Tonight, as your body lies in stillness, and your breath becomes the rhythm of the room, allow yourself to listen, not for something, but into the space around sound. Perhaps you hear the faint hum of air, the distant murmur of night, or the soft beat of your own heart. Let it all be there, but also feel what holds it. That wide, quiet field that doesn't speak, doesn't push, doesn't name. Just the openness where awareness meets what is. You are not the voice in your head. You are not the story that follows. You are the listening,
the quiet behind the bell. And when no thought calls, and no sound stirs, the sound of no mind is already there, silent, steady, and whole. And now as the breath deepens and the mind settles, let this gentle question echo softly within you. If awareness needs no thinker, what remains when the thinker falls silent?
The story of me. Once in a remote village, there lived an old woman who kept a peculiar habit. Each night, before she went to bed, she would open a large leather-bound book on her lap and write a single sentence. One thing she did that day, one feeling, one thought, or memory. She had done this for decades. The book was thick now, its pages filled with countless lines forming the quiet tapestry of her life. A visitor once asked, "Do you write these entries so you won't forget?" She smiled gently and answered, "No, I write them because otherwise I'll start to believe the wrong ones." Her words held a subtle truth. The stories we tell ourselves and about ourselves shape our world more than we realize. Each of us carries an invisible book, filled not just with memories, but with interpretations, stories about who we are, who we were, who we must be. Stories that repeat so often they begin to feel like facts. I'm the quiet one. I'm always unlucky. I'm not lovable. I have to succeed to be worthy. These narratives are not carved in stone, yet we live by them as if they were. But where did these stories begin? And more importantly, who is the one writing them? The Buddha, in his teachings, pointed directly to the nature of this illusion. He understood that much of what we call a self is not a singular being or essence, but a narrative process, a mental construction. This self isn't found in the body, or in the feelings, or even in consciousness itself. Rather, it is built from bits of experience that are stitched together into a continuous thread. And once that thread is repeated enough, it becomes the story of me. This is not a mistake. In many ways, it's a functional part of the mind, organizing memory, identity, social roles. But the problem arises when we forget that it is a story. When we believe the protagonist of that inner narrative is a permanent, unchanging, autonomous self, we begin to suffer. We become entangled in comparison, in expectation, in regret. We take the ups and downs of experience personally, as though each one affirms or denies our worth. But what if this story of me is just that? A story. In the Meditative Sutta, the Buddha explained the process by which a simple sensory event becomes a tangled web of mental proliferation. First, there is contact. From contact comes feeling. Feeling gives rise to perception. Perception shapes thought, and thought, when not seen clearly, turns into mental proliferation. Papainka, a spiraling chain of ideas, beliefs, and self-centered narratives. A sound is not just heard, it becomes my annoyance. A look is not just seen, it becomes my rejection. The I inserts itself into everything, weaving experience into a storyline that reinforces its own centrality. But this I is not the origin of experience, it is its echo. Much like a novelist writing a character, the mind invents the self retroactively. The experiences happen first, then the self emerges to explain, to own, to justify. I did that. That happened to me. But just as the character in the novel is not the author, the me we experience is not the one truly in control. This insight is not meant to strip us of identity, but to loosen the grip of false authorship. We can still have preferences, memories, names. We can still enjoy our stories, but we begin to hold them lightly. We begin to see that the narrator is not the whole truth. There's a Zen teaching that says, when you are born, a mask is tied to your face. As you grow, you polish it, you forget, it is a mask. Enlightenment is not removing it. It is seeing that you were never the mask. When we realize that we are not our stories, we don't need to discard them. We simply stop being limited by them. One man, after many years of suffering, once sat with a teacher and confessed, "I don't know who I am anymore." The teacher looked at him warmly and replied, "Good. Now we can begin." In letting go of the fixed self, something softer arises, a presence that doesn't need identity to be valid, a way of being that is not defined by the past, nor chained to future expectations. It is not blank or hollow. It is clear, spacious, capable of holding all experiences without becoming them. This does not mean we become passive or detached. In fact, it often brings greater compassion, because when we stop believing so firmly in our story, we also stop clinging so tightly to the stories of others. We stop judging so quickly. We understand that every person we meet is not a fixed character, but a changing, mysterious being, just like us, carrying stories that may or may not be true. Tonight, as your eyes rest and the mind slows, begin to notice the stories running softly in the background. Perhaps it's a memory of something you wish you had done differently. Perhaps it's a label you've worn for decades. Perhaps it's a fear of not being enough. Let them come, but do not take them at face value. Ask gently, is this true, or is this just another page in the book? Let your breath turn each page slowly. Let each exhale soften the edges of the old sentences. You don't have to rewrite your story tonight, but you can stop reading it like it's the only book in the world. You are not the victim, the hero, the failure, or the success. You are the awareness that notices all of these arise and fall. You are the blank page before the story begins. You are the silence between the lines. And now, as the body sinks deeper into rest, let this quiet question drift with you into sleep. If the story of me was never written, what is here now, still breathing?
Waves without a shore, in a coastal village where the tides ruled every rhythm of life. There was an elder known for her calm. She lived in a small hut by the sea, and each morning before the sun rose, she would walk to the shoreline and sit quietly on the rocks. When asked why she did this, she replied, "I watch the waves until I forget where the ocean ends, and I begin." This simple practice held a deep teaching. Most of us live as if we are waves, separate, independent, rising and falling, struggling to maintain our form. We try to stand out, to hold our shape, to resist the pull of impermanence. But the truth, as both spiritual insight and science have long suggested, is that we are not separate from the ocean at all. We are not isolated waves. We are movement within a vast, boundless sea. The Buddha warned against two extremes in our understanding of self and reality. The first is eternalism, the belief that there is an unchanging, permanent soul or self that lives forever, untouched by time. The second is nihilism, the view that nothing exists, and that life is ultimately empty of meaning or consequence. He rejected both. Instead, he offered the middle way, a path of deep wisdom rooted in observation, not speculation. A path that sees things as they are, neither fixed nor void, but fluid and conditioned. This perspective doesn't require belief. It invites inquiry. It asks, what do you actually find when you look closely at experience? Is there anything truly stable? Any essence that remains untouched by change? And when you cannot find it, does life become less precious or more? There's a verse in the Kakayanagotta Sutta where the Buddha says, all exists is one extreme. All does not exist is another. The Tathagata teaches the Dharma by the middle way. This means that instead of clinging to the story of a permanent self
or collapsing into despair over the absence of one, we begin to see life as it actually is, a dance of causes and conditions, beautiful in its impermanence, meaningful without needing to be permanent. Imagine a wave rising from the ocean. For a brief moment it appears distinct. It has a crest, a curve, a motion all its own, but it does not separate itself from the sea. Its rise and fall are entirely dependent on wind, water, gravity, and countless unseen factors. The wave exists, but only as part of the ocean. It has no separate enduring identity, and yet it moves, it dances, it reflects the light. So it is with us. We appear as individual forms, bodies, names, histories, but these appearances arise from a vast web of interdependent conditions, genetics, environment, culture, time, and the infinite network of human and natural relationships. We are not separate. We are not self-made. We are the ocean, momentarily shaped into waves. This understanding softens the burden of selfhood. We no longer need to prove ourselves as isolated beings, nor fear the dissolution of identity. We begin to live with a gentler sense of who we are, less rigid, more open. We stop demanding permanence from things that are meant to change, and in doing so we suffer less. One day, a student came to a Zen master in tears. "I feel like I'm losing myself," she said. "The more I practice, the more I question who I am." The teacher listened, then walked her to a nearby pond. He dropped a handful of petals into the water and watched them swirl. "Are the petals lost?" he asked. "No," she replied. "They're just not where they were." The teacher smiled. "Exactly. We are never truly lost. Even when old identities fall away, even when the roles we played no longer fit, there is something underneath that remains, not a thing, not a person, but the space in which everything moves. This is not a self in the conventional sense. It is not something you can name or hold. It is simply the awareness that recognizes impermanence without fear. Some call this emptiness. Others call it the unconditioned. The Buddha referred to it not as nothingness, but as the end of clinging, the end of needing to grasp at I and mine. And what remains when we let go is not a void, but peace. A peace that isn't created but revealed. Tonight, as you settle more deeply into stillness, feel the breath move in and out like waves on a quiet shore. Let each inhale rise gently, each exhale fall. Notice how thoughts drift in and then dissolve, how sensations come and go, how the story of self loosens its grip the more you watch without reacting. You do not need to be anyone tonight. You do not need to resolve anything, achieve anything, or hold on to anything. You are not the crest of the wave, struggling to stay above the surface. You are the ocean beneath, vast and quiet, effortlessly holding it all, even as identities come and go. Mother, partner, friend, artist, seeker, something constant holds the changing. Not a self, but a presence. Not a person, but a space. This is not a belief to adopt. It is a reality to rest into. So let yourself rest now. Let the tides rise and fall without resistance. Let the wave lose its shape and return to the sea. You were never separate. And now, as your body releases its final tension, consider this gentle question. If you are not the wave, what does it feel like to finally return to the ocean? The ocean beneath the self. In the south of Japan, there is a tradition among pearl divers to spend long minutes beneath the water, holding their breath in silence, searching. These divers do not wear tanks or carry tools. They descend with only a single lungful of air and the strength of calm intention. Over time, they learn to listen to the rhythm of the ocean, to feel its shifting currents and surrender to its weight. They do not resist it, they join it. The greatest secret, they say, is not how long you can stay under, but how deeply you can trust what holds you. This quiet trust is something few of us are taught in daily life. From early on, we are conditioned to hold tightly to roles, identities, stories, and opinions. We are told to define ourselves, to brand ourselves, to protect and project who we are into the world. We are taught that to be someone is essential, and to lose that sense is terrifying. But there is another way, a quieter path, one that does not ask us to reject who we are, but to explore more deeply what lies beneath. The Buddha often described the self as a mirage, a set of processes mistaken for a singular thing. But this wasn't meant to frighten us, it was meant to free us, to help us see that we do not need to constantly perform or maintain a fixed identity, that we can let go, not into nothing, but into something far more spacious. He did not point to emptiness as a void, but as an openness that holds everything, the ocean beneath the waves. When we sit quietly and observe, we begin to notice that identity is not a fixed center, but a movement, an ever-shifting arrangement of memory, thought, feeling, and form. It's not something we own, it's something we experience. Like the wind through trees or sunlight on water, it is visible in its effects but elusive in its origin. We say, "I am," so easily, but rarely stop to ask what I is pointing to. What arises instead, as the layers peel back, is not confusion, but relief. There is a great peace in not having to be someone all the time. When we drop the effort to uphold an image of ourselves, whether proud or ashamed, admired or invisible, we find rest, a deep, abiding rest. We discover that we are not the mask, nor the one behind the mask. We are the space that allows both to arise and dissolve. This is not about erasing personality or denying human uniqueness. Each of us is a constellation of traits, experiences, quirks, and dreams. But these do not need to be clung to. They are like patterns in a kaleidoscope, beautiful, shifting, and never quite the same. When we see clearly, we can engage with our lives more fully, not from a place of fear or defense, but from a grounded freedom that isn't bound to any particular shape. A well-known Zen koan asks, "What was your original face before your parents were born?" It does not ask for a literal answer. It invites us to step outside of the story we've been telling ourselves, to remember that who we truly are cannot be contained in a name or biography, that beneath all the labels, daughter, father, artist, patient, survivor, there is something wordless and wide, not a self, but a silence. One teacher described it this way: when the wave stops trying to stay a wave, it discovers it has always been water. This realization does not end life, it deepens it. You still act, speak, love, create, but you are no longer confined by the idea of who is doing it. You are no longer exhausted by the need to protect a self-image. You are simply here, awake, breathing, and deeply enough. In this space, compassion grows naturally. When we no longer cling tightly to I, we no longer divide so sharply into us and them. We begin to recognize that others too are moving waves of condition and change. Their anger is not them, their kindness is not them. Like us, they are shaped by unseen currents, swept up in their own tides. And this understanding does not lead to indifference. It leads to tenderness, to a kind of seeing that forgives more easily and fears less often. This is what the Buddha called liberation, not the escape from life, but the release from delusion, the ending of the exhausting project of maintaining me as a fixed and separate thing. And what remains when the burden lifts is not emptiness in the hollow sense, but an intimacy with life that is unfiltered,
immediate, and alive. Tonight, as your body softens and your breath flows like tide water along the shore, notice the space beneath the sensations, beneath the thoughts, beneath the stories. It is always there, waiting. You do not have to sink into it. You are already held by it. The same way the sea holds every wave, without demanding it to be anything more. Let the identity of the day fall away. Let the memories rest. Let the expectations dissolve. There is no one left to impress, no role left to maintain. Just the gentle rhythm of breath, just the warmth of presence, just this. You are not the separate wave struggling to stay intact. You are the ocean itself, deep, quiet, and whole. As sleep draws near, allow this final question to echo gently. If you are the ocean beneath the self, what could ever disturb your depth?
The path beyond thought. There was once a man who climbed a mountain every day for years, convinced that the answer to his suffering was hidden in the view from the summit. He studied maps, questioned other travelers, practiced mantras, and endured harsh weather to reach the top again and again. But each time he arrived, he found the same clouds, the same silence, the same unanswered question. Why, after all this effort, do I still feel incomplete? One morning, weary and sore, he stopped halfway up the trail and sat beneath a tree. For the first time, he didn't climb. He didn't chase or search. He simply listened to the wind in the grass, to the rhythm of his breath, to the thoughts rising and falling without needing to be solved. In that quiet pause, something shifted. He hadn't reached the top, but he had reached stillness. And in stillness, he found what the peak had never offered. In many ways, the spiritual path mirrors this man's journey. We often believe that if we just think deeply enough, if we analyze, read, discuss, and reason, we can finally arrive at freedom. We treat awakening like a puzzle to be solved, a riddle whose key is hidden in thought. But what the Buddha offered was not an answer found in mental analysis. It was a transformation in how we perceive. The Buddhist path is not a philosophy in the conventional sense. It's not a belief system to argue over or a doctrine to memorize. It is a practice, a lived, breathing, unfolding way of being. A path, not of acquiring more knowledge, but of releasing the layers that obscure what is already here. The Buddha outlined this path through the three trainings: sila, ethical conduct; samadhi, concentration; and panya, wisdom. Each supports the others. Together, they form a spiral: ethical living calming the mind, concentration sharpening clarity, and wisdom illuminating the nature of reality. The first training, sila, is not about guilt or punishment. It is about creating the inner conditions for peace. When we act with kindness, integrity, and restraint, our minds naturally settle. There's less to regret, less to fear. We are not pulled in so many directions by deception, resentment, or harm. Ethical living isn't a moral code. It's a refuge, a place where the mind becomes quiet enough to see clearly. From that stillness arises samadhi, the cultivation of focused, steady attention. Meditation is not about pushing thoughts away or chasing bliss. It's about learning to rest with what is, to sit with the breath, to observe the body, to notice how thought arises, dances, and dissolves without the need to follow or resist. Over time, the mind stops clinging to every passing ripple and begins to settle into a deeper awareness, a presence that is intimate but undisturbed. It is in this fertile ground that panya, wisdom, naturally blossoms, not intellectual understanding, but direct seeing, a kind of knowing that doesn't come through thinking about the truth, but through quietly resting in it. Wisdom is what arises when the mind is no longer chasing identity, when it stops reacting to every sensation as personal, when it learns to trust impermanence instead of fearing it. And in that space beyond the reflexive thinking mind, we begin to experience life differently. We see that craving, aversion and delusion are not flaws we must conquer, but habits we can outgrow. We begin to notice the moments when suffering arises and how it's almost always connected to a demand that this moment be different, that we be different, that something must be added or removed before we can feel at peace. But peace, in the deepest sense, is not something added. It is what remains when grasping falls away. There's a story of a man who carried a heavy sack everywhere he went. No one knew what was in it, but he clutched it tightly, even as it bent his spine and slowed his steps. One day he met a traveler who asked, "Why do you carry that?" The man replied, "Because it's mine." The traveler said nothing, only pointed to the road ahead, wide and clear. Eventually the man set the sack down, just for a moment. When he did, he realized he had no idea why he had carried it in the first place. The weight wasn't necessary. It never had been. Thought, too, can become a burden when carried without reflection. There's nothing wrong with thinking. It is a beautiful, creative tool, but it becomes suffering when mistaken for identity. When we believe that each thought must be acted on, believed in or defended, we lose our way. The Buddhist path invites us to see this with gentleness. We do not need to fight the mind. We simply observe it. We return to the breath. We return to the body. We return to now. Again and again we train the mind, not by controlling it, but by softening around it, letting it move, like a breeze through a forest, without trying to stop the wind. Tonight, as you rest, notice how thought may still move within you. Notice how your mind may reach for unfinished ideas, unresolved feelings, lingering echoes of the day. Let them come. Let them go. You are not the thinker. You are the space around the thought. You do not need to follow the mind into another story. You are already home. And as the breath flows in and out, as the body releases its tension into the bed beneath you, trust that you are being held, not by a concept, not by a role, but by a presence beyond thought. What the ancients sometimes called the unborn, the unmade. It cannot be grasped, it cannot be named, but it can be known in stillness. The path is not far, it is not up the mountain, it is here. With every breath, every moment of letting go, you are walking it. As the mind begins to dissolve into sleep, let this final question drift softly through the quiet. If you stop chasing your thoughts, what might you finally catch?
The gentle collapse of I. There is a quiet moment in every snowfall when the world seems to disappear. Roads vanish. Familiar paths are softened. Edges blur. For a little while, the sharp lines that defined the world grow indistinct, and everything is held in a shared whiteness, unchanging, untouched. If you've ever walked through a snowfall at night, you may have felt it, the strange hush, the peace that doesn't announce itself, the subtle knowing that something has gently fallen away. The experience of awakening true inner clarity is often like this, not dramatic, not explosive. It rarely comes with trumpets or visions or declarations. More often it arrives like snow, softly, gradually, as the structures we once clung to begin to lose their weight. The collapse of the I, the ego, the fixed identity, the imagined self, is not a destruction, but a quiet falling away. The Buddha didn't speak of enlightenment as becoming something greater, more powerful, or special. He spoke of it as cessation, the end of suffering, the end of clinging, the end of delusion. It is not a becoming, but a releasing, the end of taking the thoughts in our heads as the authors of truth.
The end of believing that the voice narrating our life is who we are. What falls is not the person, but the illusion of solidity, of separateness. This can be disorienting at first. We spend most of our lives building an identity. We polish it, defend it, decorate it. We tell stories about it, make plans for it, feel pain when it's rejected, and pride when it's admired. We invest so deeply in what I like, what I want, what I believe, that the suggestion it might not exist in the way we've assumed can feel like a threat. But when we look gently and honestly, we find something surprising. The I we've worked so hard to protect is nowhere to be found. There are thoughts, yes, emotions, sensations, memories, roles, preferences. But where is the thing that holds them? Where is the fixed observer, the true owner of these passing states? As the Buddha pointed out again and again, it cannot be found. Not because we're missing it, but because it was never there in the way we imagined. The self is not a singular entity. It is a pattern, a habit, a convenient fiction, useful for functioning, but dangerous when taken as truth. Modern neuroscience echoes this. Brain studies show that what we call the self arises from scattered processes, each responsible for different aspects of identity, memory, language, perception, decision-making. There is no central seat of self, no homunculus behind the eyes. What we feel as me is an emergent property of many systems briefly aligning. And when those systems quiet down, during meditation, deep sleep, or moments of profound presence, the sense of I often fades, yet something remains. Awareness remains. Peace remains. This is not disappearance. It is spaciousness. The absence of I does not mean nothing is left. It means what remains is no longer bound, no longer at war with itself. A student once asked a meditation teacher, "How will I know when the self has dissolved?" The teacher replied, "When you stop asking who you are and start noticing what is here without needing your name attached to it." This is what we begin to glimpse on the path. Not a new self, but the end of needing one. Not an emptiness to fear, but a fullness that has no boundaries. A presence that does not need to say, "I am here," in order to exist. The collapse of the self is not the end of the person. It is the end of the illusion that the person was ever separate from everything else. And in that moment, everything becomes intimate. You no longer love another. You simply love. You no longer seek truth. You rest in it. You no longer chase freedom. You live it. A woman once described her first deep meditation retreat. She said that one morning, while walking slowly through the forest, the sense of herself dropped away. There was no her walking. There was just walking. No observer, just bird calls and sunlight. For those few minutes, there was no boundary between inside and outside. When she returned, she didn't feel enlightened. She felt ordinary, but she had touched something real, and that was enough. This is the gentle collapse, not a shattering, but a soft merging. Not the vanishing of being, but the end of mistaken identity. So tonight, as you breathe gently into your rest, begin to soften the grip on who you think you are. Let go of the name, the role, the history. Let go of the questions. Am I doing this right? Have I changed enough? Have I found it yet? These are thoughts. You are not required to follow them. You do not have to be someone tonight. You can simply be. Allow awareness to remain. Simple, open, clear. Notice how it holds each breath without judgment, how it receives each sensation without grasping. There is no center needed for this to be real. No I required to experience peace.
And as the edges of identity melt into the stillness of night, you may find that you are not lost at all. In fact, you have never been more at home. The I has not been destroyed. It has simply been seen through. The burden of becoming falls away, and what's left is silence, spaciousness, life itself. As you drift further into the quiet, let this final reflection guide you. If the I collapses softly like mist in the morning sun, what rises in its place but peace?
No one here, but stillness remains. In the final chapter of a Zen master's journal, written in faded brushstrokes before his passing, there is a single line that reads, "When the self disappeared, nothing was missing." It is not a riddle or a poetic flourish. It is a quiet truth, hard-won and gently realized. He had spent a lifetime meditating, teaching, and guiding others through the fog of identity, and in the end, he left no doctrine, no summary, no name. Just that line, simple, clear, and complete. We reach this place at the end of our journey, not as a destination, but as a return. The winding path through illusion, thought, clinging and questioning does not take us somewhere new. It brings us back to what has always been here, what was present before the stories, before the striving, before the endless refrains of I, me, mine. And what we find, in the soft light of that return, is not absence, but presence, not void, but intimacy. Stillness that has never depended on the presence of someone to hold it. This is not a negation of life, but a revelation of its true depth. The Buddha described it as the unconditioned, not as a place or object, but as the natural state that remains when the need to become someone falls away. It cannot be possessed, only recognized. It cannot be understood by thought, only known through silence. Here, in this silence, there is no longer a need to protect or perform. There is no one to impress, no mask to hold. You are not the character. You are not even the author. You are the blank page, the space between the lines, the awareness in which the story once unfolded and now gently dissolves. Even as your body rests and your mind continues its final soft circling, you may notice that what remains is not empty at all. There is breath, there is warmth, there is presence. Life continues, but without a center demanding control or ownership. Actions arise, but not from ego. Emotions come and go, but they no longer cling. The narrative of me no longer needs to be sustained, and in its absence there is peace. A teacher once said, "When I was young, I tried to make something of myself. When I grew older, I tried to find my true self. Now I just sit, and birds land near me." This is not apathy. This is freedom. The absence of self is not a void to be feared. It is the clearing of space for everything to be fully met, without agenda. You still live. You still laugh. You still love. But now there is lightness. You are no longer the wave crashing endlessly to stay afloat. You are the ocean, deep and still, allowing the wave to rise and fall as it must. The wind can come, the world can turn, but beneath it all, there is no disturbance. And this is where our journey leads us. To this simple, sacred recognition that beneath the noise of becoming, something has always been quietly present, something whole, steady, and untouched. It does not ask for belief. It does not require perfection. It waits only for you to stop searching long enough to notice. So now, in these final moments before sleep fully arrives, there is nothing left to do, no lesson left to grasp. Only this breath, softly entering and leaving. Only this body, perfectly enough just as it is. Only this awareness, open and calm, resting without a name. You do not need to remember the teachings. You do not need to return to them tomorrow. They are not separate from you. They are not somewhere else. They are already here, breathing with you,
dissolving into you, as natural as the dark wrapping itself around the edges of night. You are not the self you once believed in. You are not the mind trying to find peace. You are the stillness that remains when both fall silent. And that stillness is vast. That stillness is love. That stillness is home. As sleep gently takes you, let this final reflection stay with you like a soft echo in the quiet. If there is no one left to be, who rests now in such perfect peace?